Okay, welcome to this interview. We're going to be chatting with Dr. Stephen Greer, who's going to be giving us some updates, his perspective on some of the current events going on with coronavirus and that sort of thing. But we're also going to get into some of the subject and the content of his upcoming new movie that's coming out on April 7th called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Now, there's going to be some fascinating discussion about human contact with extraterrestrials, what some of the emerging UFO narratives mean and how we can be more discerning of what's going on, because as we know, there's a lot starting to come out on this subject and people are hungry for this information. And Dr. Greer has a lot of great ideas as to how we can navigate this information and perhaps not get caught up in some of the narratives that might actually push us off course and stop us from, getting into this state where we can truly begin connecting on a meaningful level with extraterrestrials. So let's dive into this interview here. All right, welcome, Dr. Greer. Thanks so much for doing this interview with us here today.
You're welcome. Great to do it. I love your site.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Let's begin with some of the current events that everybody is talking about. I know you did a live stream regarding this topic, which is coronavirus, and with your background as a doctor, you're able to look at what's going on with this and maybe answer one of the questions that a lot of people have when it comes to this pandemic is there reason to have the level of global lockdown that we're currently seeing at the moment?
Well, I mean, that's a debatable issue. Certainly, the only thing they're trying to do with this lockdown is prevent so many people getting sick so quickly that it collapses the healthcare system. Because particularly in the United States, similar to Italy, unlike Taiwan or Korea, we did nothing from December until March to do what is called surveillance tracking of where the virus is and contain it so society could go on as normal. The result, of course, in doing that, and this is where I think we're going to learn a lesson, that accomplishment matters, competence matters, expertise matters. Even though we live in an age where certain segments of the population just think you can just be an effect. At a certain point, people are going to realize it really does matter if somebody knows what the hell they're doing. In the United States, for example, unfortunately in Italy, everyone was asleep at the wheel. Now, the genome for this virus was figured out in December. So we should have had a very accurate test, which we still really don't have. It's only 70% accurate. And an antibody test to pick up to see who's already been exposed, who'd be probably immune, pushing out the door in January, certainly February. We still don't have that in the United States. I have friends and family members that are doctors like I am. They can't even get a test for themselves when they might have been exposed. The result of this is that this thing is running like wildfire. And so all this sort of, and I hate to use the term, police state action to lock down. I mean, literally here in Virginia where I live, they're stopping people for just driving to go to the grocery store.
Wow.
It's scary. I mean, this is really bad here. So the point I'm making is that now that we're here, they're trying to keep the whole system from collapsing in terms of the medical system. Now, of course, the trade-off is that we've collapsed the economy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, while I certainly understand that bureaucracies and a lot of these sort of folks who work in government tend to be lifers who are frequently incompetent, honestly. I think in this case, the level of incompetence from the top down is so mind-blowing that you almost wonder if it wasn't planned. Because, in other words, it's like planned obsolescence for something to go out of work. But it's like a planned level of chaos. My concern is that, without getting into speculation, is that going forward, the citizenry are going to have to, because I'm right down the street here from Thomas Jefferson's home, who, of course, wrote the Declaration of Independence,
right,
that we're going to have to watch what our freedoms and liberties are. It's sort of like after 9/11, when the Patriot Act went through and everyone was running scared and gave up and took complete leave of their senses in a panic. And we ended up with, the surveillance state in the United States, which has never been reined in. And I think that we're going to have to be very careful in democracies. Now, I think in totalitarian states like China, where you have an authoritarian central government that's very much a command economy, a command police state, no freedom of the press, no freedom of anything most of the time, that's not as big of a adjustment for people in those societies. In the United States, Canada, Western Europe, other countries, it's going to be a real shock for people to live under virtual house arrest.
Mm-hmm.
Or in Virginia, we just announced a 3-month, starting a couple weeks ago until mid-June, lockdown, where you're literally locked down at home. And that was announced by the governor, which was shocking. Now the media is starting to talk about that may be on and off for an entire year. So you have to begin to look at this. And my concern, there's a public health part of this that I certainly understand. They call it flattening the curve, which isn't really accurate. What they're really trying to do is stretch out the curve over time. So the number of critical care cases, like I've taken care of 60, 80,000 people as an emergency ER doctor, you can't take care of them when everyone comes in all at once. And this virus is 3 times more contagious than the regular flu. It's not the flu. It's been mischaracterized that way by President Trump and others. It's its own virus. And so we're going to have to figure out, how to balance having society function at all. Because once this current lockdown happens, unless it's a seasonal situation where, it just naturally dies out in warmer weather, which they're hoping, as soon as people get out and about again, it's going to go way up. The curve's it's going to take off. Maybe not as high, but maybe higher. I mean, like in the 1918 pandemic, the second wave was more deadly and bigger than the first. So unfortunately, we should have had hundreds of millions of antibody tests and tests for this virus, so we would have known. So all of society wouldn't have to be in lockdown. You would know the people who needed to be, kept away for a couple weeks. But because we didn't do that, now we're in this situation where, without any containment possible, they're now talking about mitigation, which is a code word for basically social distancing. Everyone's in lockdown. And it's unfortunate, but I think that the bigger question I have, I don't know if you noticed on April 1st, April Fool's Day, the CIA, I just sent this to you, tweeted out a snarky thing about UFOs and saying we're up to the challenge. Mm-hmm. And one of the themes of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the part of the first part of the film that you're in, and thank you for participating in that.
Thank you for having me.
Is dealing with the fact that, we have known for decades that they're planning a false flag operation around an alien threat which does not exist. Right. And so one of my concerns is that the overreach on this lockdown, if we're not careful, could just simply be a beta testing of the police state and state action to control the masses when they hit the button to hoax an alien threat. And it totally would be a hoax. And of course, Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, on his deathbed told Carol Rosin, who's one of our military and aerospace witnesses, that in fact, that was always the plan from the 40s and 50s onward, to either, on the one hand, keep the science and technology secret about these extraterrestrial interstellar vehicles, but to hold that back as a trump card to play out eventually to create sort of a global police state around a threat that we all unite against to fight. The other worrisome thing about the coronavirus is that I'm beginning to see mouthpieces who have denied the UFO issue, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and others, and literally say that we should regard the coronavirus like, I'm quoting, invading space aliens.
Wow.
He tweeted that out. And someone put it on, tweeted on my site about it. And I was kind of horrified. And that was several weeks ago. And I've seen similar language in other media and periodicals that are tied in to the national security structure in the United States. As you know from, and you'll see this in the movie, folks, when this comes out on April 7th, that Daniel Sheehan, who is a constitutional attorney and did the Pentagon Papers, saw a document that listed 42 people who were on the CIA payroll way back in the 70s. It's probably quadruple that now, for every major media in the world. And their job was to kill stories, spin them, or be there. And they were often national security editors and people who are the senior editors at major media. And this really worried Mr. Sheehan, because he's thought, so there goes the fourth estate, the so-called free press. So we know that the mechanisms of the intelligence community are very embedded now in the media and also the alternative media like the internet. And so the question is, we as a citizenry, all of us have to be mindful of this and not be deceived like we were on 9/11, like we were in the Vietnam War when we staged the Gulf of Tonkin incident and basically hoaxed and expand so we could expand the Vietnam War, so the war profiteers and the warmongers could make more money. Never mind, it was a lost cause and they knew it. I think that we have to be mindful of how easy it is through fear. And this is what I'm worried that the fear and panic factor of the coronavirus may end up being more deadly than the virus itself.
For sure.
So I think we have to find a way to stay focused on what the solutions are to this. And I think a big part of the solution is people understanding these issues and their knowledge, practicing mindfulness and practicing meditation and the development of higher states of consciousness, and also making direct contact with these civilizations who certainly understand what a terrible jackpot humanity is in right now. I mean, we're facing a lot of crises: the biosphere, the environment, now the coronavirus, huge disparity of wealth and poverty in the world, a situation where a handful of people have the majority of the net worth of the planet in their hands. And so I think we have to begin to look at this and say, how are we going to come together as a people and create movements to fix that? But in particular, what face are we showing to these interstellar visitors? Right now, the only government response is an unacknowledged special access project response, which is not even under the control of the president and the Congress, because I briefed all those folks over the years. It's under the control of a fascistic control group that does exactly what they want, when they want, and they may or may not tell the president what they're doing, usually not, by the way. And I know a number of people on that committee, the Majority Intelligence Committee. It's called MAJIC, M-A-J-I-C. And the issue becomes very quickly, in my mind, what are we going to do as something, not just running around in fear, but can we do something constructive and positive to solve this problem? And the answer is absolutely yes. And that's individuals learning the techniques and the concepts so that they become what I call an ambassador from humans to these civilizations, where we become the people representing the face of humanity, not the militarist, not the fascists, not the unacknowledged special access projects, not the Star Wars Space Force weapon systems, but us, the people who are, most of humans, are peaceful, want a good life, are not sociopaths, and want to have something beautiful happen for the planet into the future. That these civilizations are waiting for us, you, me, everyone listening, to do something besides looking at videos, go out into the stars and say, we are here to work with you in a collaborative effort to bring our civilization to the next level, to a level 1 civilization that's peaceful, has free energy, becomes interstellar eventually. But they're not going to do this. I mean, everyone asked me, even way back on CNN, I used to have a host called Larry King. And I was on his show and he said, well, why don't they land on the White House lawn? I said, well, first of all, they'd be blown out of the sky. Secondly, the cabal, these unacknowledged special access projects, would say, see, we're being invaded, like the day the Earth stood still. or the
Right.
Independence Day movie. So they're too smart to do something stupid like that. That'd be really dumb. So then what's the solution? Millions of humans bypassing these dysfunctional governments and making contact directly. And that, I can tell you, is the number one fear of the intelligence community.
Yeah.
They're terrified that you and me and millions of people like us actually start taking this matter into our own hands. And so I call this the ultimate cosmic civil disobedience, where we're going to say to them, we're not going to go along with your little secrets. We're going to do this on our own. And actually, that's what I said to the head of Army intelligence in 1992, right to his face. I said, this is what we're going to do, and there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely, I think, the way to go. I mean, I've played around with CE5s for a lot of years. I didn't think of it that way when I was first doing it. We just got together and were trying to make contact because we were very curious, right? And it is quite an experience.
Amazing what happens. I mean, you look at this movie, you've seen it, I guess.
Yeah.
No. I mean, the experiences people have when people see this film, almost universally, they go, oh my God, this is beautiful and it's real and anyone can do it. Because the thing I like about this film is that some of the photos and images that are in it are from events I've led, but there's a ton of stuff in it from people, frankly, I have never met, who got our app. We're going to have a new app come out called CE5 Contact, and it's going to have a messaging capability. So anyone in their city or area can see other people doing CE5 and hook up with them and go out and do this together, or do it virtually while we're under lockdown in their backyards. And that's coming out, we hope, for April 7th. We're still waiting to get clearance from the iTunes store and Google on it. It's a brand new app. It's beautiful. Big shout out to Josh Gordon, who's volunteered to pull this together for us. But I feel like this Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind movie is it's a 2-hour feature film, and it introduces the concepts. But this app, the CE5 Contact app, is actually an entire course in remote viewing, the CE5 protocols, coherent thought sequencing to make contact, how to form a team, what equipment do you need, where should you be doing this, how do you respond. It's this very thorough tutorial, but also is going to have embedded in it this networking capability. So like, even if you were to take a trip to New Zealand, you could meet up with people doing CE5 there and go out with them. So it's really going to grow the movement of what I call citizens diplomacy between humans and these civilizations, where we show a peaceful, enlightened, higher consciousness side of humanity to them. And that's what they're waiting for. They're not waiting for the UN Secretary General or the president. They're waiting for us. And this is what most people don't realize, that is how change happens in society. Right. And one of the analogies I make in the documentary is, I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement. Okay, so I was born in 1955, so I'll be 65 in June, and it was amazing to see. People think that somehow the federal government, the Kennedys, did the civil rights laws and stuff. No, it was a grassroots movement of concerned people that created a mass consciousness change. The American Revolution, my mother's ancestors were the first prisoner of war with the British. But that was a ragtag group of people standing up to the tyranny of King George. The civil rights movement, I mean, I had an African-American girlfriend in high school, 72 and 73. And I was run over by a car biking to school because I had a black girlfriend, which was not okay back then in the North Carolina. Hello. You figure that far back, 45 years ago. So I think that what we have to see is that all these big changes, human rights, women's rights, the civil rights movement, gay rights, the peace movements, the environmental movement, these didn't come from edicts from on high. These didn't come from the president and the UN Secretary General. No, the leaders are lagging indicators.
Yeah.
Real change, which is what your site is, collective evolution. For us to collectively evolve, that comes from the people. It
Yeah.
always has, always. Big change never comes from the center of gravity of power. The power elite don't want change. They like it just like it is. They're in the catbird seat. They're happy. So I think that we have to understand this dynamic and begin to think about history, but also then the future. Okay, so how do we then move forward instead of being manipulated and reacting through fear to events, whether it's the coronavirus now or hosting an alien threat in the future? We have to take responsibility for our own emotions, our own intelligence, our own networking, and we have to do something enlightened and constructive. And when we do that, we will create this network in consciousness that then will light up the whole planet. That's what's the beauty of it. And the studies have shown, we can get into this in a moment after I make these introductory remarks, is that the science of consciousness is established science. That when a critical mass, say about 1% or less of people begin to meditate and do something constructively, it changes the entire society where that's happening. It doesn't have to, it's not like voting for a prime minister or president where you need 51%, or in this country, less than that because the electoral college. You don't have to win a majority in America to become the president or what have you. But this is different from that because of the power of it's like a leveraging effect in consciousness, in the field of consciousness, that shifts everyone and everything around you. Who people don't even know you're meditating, and they're being benefited from it because the field of consciousness is a singularity. There is actually only one mind in the cosmos, and it's shining through each of us. I liken this to like if you're in a beautiful cathedral and you see thousands of stained glass windows, and they're beautiful, but the light that's illuminating each window is a singularity, the sun, one thing. So we tend to capture the consciousness field, attribute it to our own window of our soul, and forget that that light coming through is actually always connected to the vast sun. So I think people need to start thinking about their own mind and consciousness as this beautiful, unbounded, infinite field. And that when we understand that and practice meditation and move through that deeper level of consciousness, it totally transforms not only ourselves, but it transforms everyone around us and our society. It's beautiful. And really, that's what the CE5 initiative, as I called it, is all about, which is, by the way, this is our 30-year anniversary.
Nice. That's awesome. That's one of the things about this whole time that I think is actually really interesting is that, you talked a lot about how, people are often looking to government. They're often looking to the center of influence to sort of tell them what to do in pretty much everything. It's like this age-old story that we have embedded within our minds, our culture, and our way of being. And it's interesting because we've seen over, the many centuries where that leads, what type of life that creates. And we're now in this position of being empowered truly as beings. And it's almost like that savior story that we see so often in religion and that we're waiting for in our culture is dying off. And, that answer and that practical solution that people are looking for, not just in connecting with extraterrestrials, but also in their everyday life and watching that transform, it comes with letting go of that savior mentality.
It does. Well, I think that's the whole thing is that people have to understand that even the great teachers, the sort of divine avatar level of beings that are highly enlightened, if you look at their words, it was always you can be as I am. You can do what I'm doing. It wasn't that they wanted to create idolatry of them, but the demagogues, people who want to create man-made organizations, which is what organized religion has become, to control the population in how they think and what they believe, they then kind of contort and twist that message. So
Right.
I think we all are beginning to realize that we've been had. And, I mean, like the Who during the Vietnam War, we won't be fooled again, is what that song was. However,
Yeah.
we have been fooled again because, as you point out, we're sort of indoctrinated in our society to look at this top down way instead of the empowerment of each of us then joining together. And the ultimate, it doesn't matter whether I point this out. It doesn't matter if you're a homeless person or an MIT professor. If you're a conscious, awake being, and you intend and use your own free will to connect to that aspect of yourself, you can connect to what is this universal constant, and then accomplish amazing things. And that's what the challenge of our time is. If we're going to make it across this chasm, this civilizational challenge we're facing, where if we're not careful, we could be facing an extinction level event, not from the coronavirus. Even if it killed 3% of the world's population, there'd still be 97%. But what we're doing to Gaia, to the living organism of the earth, people representing us without our permission, who are in these unacknowledged covert programs, shooting with high-tech electromagnetic weapons that go faster than the speed of light at these ET craft and downing them. And that's been going on since the 40s. That's what Roswell was.
Mm-hmm.
Roswell was an electronic weapon system hidden in a radar dome. And I have an FBI document. It's in the movie Unacknowledged, which probably a lot of people have seen. It's on Netflix. And that technology began to be developed in the early 20th century and was being worked on in World War II. By 1947, they still do this. They would hide these offensive weapon systems in what looks like a passive radar dome or radar system. And when they track an object, they also send out a pulse that would disable all its electronics. That's what Roswell was. That it wasn't like the ETs came from another star system and couldn't navigate the desert of New Mexico.
Yeah.
This is the cover story. Some people go, I go, no. I mean, I'm sure they could manage their way through an electrical storm in New Mexico if they're going at multiples of the speed of light through the cosmos. They were hit with a new system that they didn't anticipate, and it caused them to have their navigation and systems scrambled, and two of them collided near Roswell. One went down nearby and one continued near Socorro. And the third one wasn't found until 1951, I believe, in a remote area of northern New Mexico desert wilderness. But I'm sort of moving off the topic a little bit, but the key point I'm making is that's kind of the face of humanity that they're being assaulted with.
Right.
So the question I asked in 1990 was, isn't there another way of doing this? Shouldn't humans, ordinary people like you and me, pick up the mantle and the responsibility of this relationship? But to do that properly, we have to understand who and what we are.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get out of this mindset that we're all my grandmother was a Native American, Cherokee, and the Native people thought it was so strange that Western civilization viewed all of us as separate instead of woven together through the Great Spirit and this fabric of life. And we have to get back to understanding that we're all woven together and we're all in this consciousness field and connected to it morning, noon, and night, whether we're awake or asleep. We're all connected in that field of consciousness. And that if we meditate and practice, we can begin to do things like remote viewing, being a seer and seeing the future, remote view an ET craft and connect to their communication system and invite them to interact with us. That's what a close encounter of the fifth kind is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so exciting is that, it's like the hardware and software we need to do everything I'm talking about is already hardwired within us. We just have to remember it. And
exactly.
That's why we don't want to be, one of the things I really dislike is when someone, I was friends with a man named Ingo Swann. I don't know if you know who he
Yeah.
is. He was a well-known remote viewer, and the CIA pulled him in. Wonderful guy, actually. And I was at his apartment up in New York, and a cool artist, by the way. But he really, and I used to talk about this, is that the public are so accustomed through religion and politics and our educational system to engage in idolatry, or hero worship, or cult personalities of cult, which I loathe, frankly, that they think, oh, well, Dr. Greer can do this, but I can't. Or
Right.
Ingo Swann can do this, but I can't. Or Dr. Russell Targ can do this, but I can't. And the studies have shown, in fact, every single person just randomly off the street who's given a few instructions can remote view and do all this stuff as well as the most adept people out there. It is a total myth that you need to go to someone who claims to be the Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah.
One reason why I'm very skeptical of people who set themselves up as, quote, channels to something, that I said, well, why don't you just teach someone else to connect to that person themselves?
Yeah.
In other words, teach someone to fish, not to eat the fish you've caught. That's what I tell people. And so the CE5 initiative is about everyone awakening to their ability to do this, which is innate within our own conscious being. We're all capable of doing this. I just reject the fact that there's any fundamental difference between the Dalai Lama or Ingo Swann or the great masters of the East or whatever, and you and me. That everyone, they may have been able to experience things because they disciplined themselves, but innately, we all have that faculty. We all have that ability. And that's something that that's one of the real lessons we need to learn if we're going to make it to this next level of civilization where we become a higher ordered, peaceful world civilization that's enlightened, that then can become interplanetary and live in a way that this earth isn't harmed, et cetera. Because even the technologies everybody wants out. Oh, what about the free energy? I said, yeah, those are cool. I've seen them. I've been in some underground, what they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And they're real. It's not an urban myth. But if those are put in the wrong hands, which is where they are now, and you're tapping into the infinite energy field that Tesla talked about, and you turn it into a weapon, which is what these sociopaths have done, by the way, you can destroy the planet. So it begs the question, we have to collectively evolve and consciously evolve. At the same time, we're disclosing the ET presence, but also disclosing these technologies. It all has to be done together.
Yeah. Those technologies are absolutely meant for a different state of consciousness than we're currently experiencing. That's what it seems. I want to go back to a little bit of some of the false flag stuff. It's going to tie into the movie as well, but I wanted to first talk about how it relates to the coronavirus a little bit, and then move to the movie aspect of it. But you mentioned in one of the YouTube lives you did just recently that you felt it was possible the virus may have been released accidentally or something to that effect. When I was thinking about that, and you were talking even within this discussion a little bit about how you almost felt like it could have been planned in terms of the incompetence, right? Like, why are they so incompetent? How is this spreading so much? And when we relate that to the taking away of freedoms, much like we saw with 9/11 and so forth, I just wanted to kind of hear you expand a little bit on this, if you have some thoughts. Do you feel as though this could have been, sort of pre-thought out, or are they just taking advantage of sort of a natural occurring situation?
I think it's the former, but I will tell you that I have people on my team who are very senior PhD, molecular biologists, geneticists, world-renowned on my team, who work with the government and have worked with the government in army biowarfare settings, who have given me very specific information that I just simply don't want to go into because as it is now, my sites are being flagged. I'm at risk of being shut down. And we also don't want to create a situation that would lead to World War III.
Right.
I'm being really honest with you. So everyone has a curiosity. I don't think stirring around shit, excuse me, makes it smell any better. The situation is what it is. There are psychopaths that unfortunately have enormous power, and not only nuclear and biological, but scalar. These weapon systems that are, faster than the speed of light, the longitudinal systems. And what I mean by that are the ones that, a wave of light is like, it's a wave, and it goes like this. And that's 186,000 miles per second is how it travels. A longitudinal electromagnetic signal is a point that goes out in all directions, straight line, and is multiples of the speed of light. And those have been weaponized. And so we're very vulnerable to the fact that disclosure of these technologies hasn't happened, so that even watchdog organizations around the world could contain how they're being used. They're in unacknowledged special access projects. So whatever the origins of the coronavirus is, and people can believe whatever they want about that.
Yeah.
It's out, and it's out amongst us. My concern is, if we're not careful, the way we react will play into the hands of these sociopaths in unacknowledged special access projects who overuse people's fear to abuse freedoms and to control society and to control the economy, et cetera, and so on, which is exactly what's happening right now. Now, you could argue that once the Frankenstein got off the table and is out amongst us, a lot of this had to happen. But then the question is, why did it happen? Who let it happen? Who let the genie out of the box? And who was so stupid and incompetent, who were sitting at the switch, who, even if they weren't part of the cabal, let this thing get so out of control and not contained, when the biotech industry in the United States easily could have been ordered through the National Defense Authorization Act to stand up millions of tests and the antibody tests to see where it is and contain it.
Yeah.
It's too late for that now, unfortunately. We still need to do it. But unfortunately, since that wasn't done in December, January, February, now our whole civilization is at risk for, the economy collapsing into flames. And if that happens further, then you get into more and more police state situations, because there's going to be panic in the streets. So we have to be very aware of this and not let this go too far. But I think that the individual is feeling powerless to do anything about that. So what I like to focus on, what do we have within our ability to do?
Yeah.
Which is why I prefer not to dwell on conspiracy theories and things. By the way, I don't deal with theories. I only do, as you know, I have over 980 military and intelligence and corporate sources.
Yeah.
And they're not fake ones like so many people in the disclosure movement have. These are legitimate ones. And so, which is why, I got back from DC. I'm frequently asked to brief people.
Yeah.
My group is sort of a clearinghouse for hundreds of these sort of folks who are connected to and know about and have networks in these very classified projects. And I think we have to figure out, knowing what we know, what are we going to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day? And even bringing a beautiful documentary out, which is really a movement call to action film. We can't do what we were going to do a month ago, which we were going to have a premiere in LA. And then I was going to do things all over the world and have, theatrical showings and Q&As and sort of create a lot of communities of action around it. Because now I'm sat down in a situation here out at my country house and in lockdown also. Yeah. So, so now we have to figure out what can we do given these realities to do something that is edifying and enlightening for us? And I think that being angry about the state of the world doesn't fix it.
Right.
And there's a wonderful Vedic in the Sanskrit Vedas. If everything is dark, moving the darkness around doesn't dispel the dark, but lighting one match, lighting one candle dispels the dark. And if we get millions of candles lit, the analogy being in consciousness and linked together, then there's this bright. So I think we have to look at the world is really a mess, but how do we fix that mess? So, I'm sort of a very pragmatist in that sense. I'm an emergency doctor, so I tend to look at, here's this disaster that's come in. How do I fix this? How do I save this life or these 6 lives that just came in from a head-on collision with guts hanging out and whatever? Excuse me. But so I tend to be, here's the situation we're in. How do we fix this in a way that would really be effective? Like right now, like in the next, few months. And if people understood the power of coming together in consciousness, now that we have, until they take down the internet, as long as we have the internet and can connect, we can do this in a coordinated fashion, which is why I've started doing these YouTube live streams. People can subscribe at youtube.com/Dr. Stephen Greer 55. The 55 is my year of birth. And doctors DR, not spelled out. And they can, we're going to start doing these more and more because I can't be out and about in the public. And I was such a klutz with these technologies, much better with a ventilator and a defibrillator than this thing I'm talking to. But I've got people now to help me because I'm a bit of an imbecile with computers and things. That now I feel like we can do this, but we can link up together, and other people can do it. With people in their own area. Let's say if there are 10 people who want to do CE5 where you live, if you can't gather together because they've blocked you down, you could do an internet or a group event where you could be meditating together and doing this all at the same time.
Yeah.
Even though you can't personally be together because they're requiring us to be in lockdown. So I think we have to look at the tools we have still and what the power of the individual conscious mind coming together with others with a clear intention. And I'll tell you that for these ET civilizations, the key thing they're looking at is they don't care what your degrees are, how rich you are, none of that. They don't care what your status in society is. They care about I call it the question of intent. What is your intention? So like if your intention is to go out and be entertained as sort of a dilettante by an ET craft showing up in the sky and jumping through hoops for you, they're not interested in you. They're never going to be interested in you. They're going to think you're an idiot. I'm being really honest. But if you go out there with a pure heart that you really want to connect to those intelligences and their civilization as a peacemaker and as someone to communicate and contact them as a representative of humanity in an enlightened way, you won't believe, people would not believe that when you get into that mind-heart space of clarity, how the heavens open up. They're gonna be there. That's a big requirement. That's the biggest requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to be in that space of the heart there. Let's continue on with the solution-oriented sort of discernment aspect of things, because there are those of us that are really ready for the more conscious approach to wanting to connect. And then there's other people that are still playing with the information. They're still trying to explore, what does this UFO story mean now that we're seeing the mainstream come out with information? And you just talked about that CIA tweet, right? And what that meant, right? And I know in this film, and I'm not going to give too much away, but I'll just quickly bring it up. But in the film, Daniel Sheehan does point to the Stars Academy and asks the question, what are they sharing? Is it possible that it is sort of this threat narrative? And it's just a question, right? That he's posing at that point. And going to the solution aspect of this, because obviously people see these organizations, they see the CIA, they have curiosity, and they may have to, be encouraged to discern. Am I hearing a threat narrative, or am I hearing the truth? How can people go about looking at these popular organizations and really ask the questions that could lead them to proper discernment, to avoid that falling into that threat narrative?
Well, I'll cliff note this for folks. If the spin, no matter what the evidence is, it's putting out defaming, negative information about the ETs, it is either wittingly or unwittingly being scripted by the intelligence community. Full stop, period. Now, much of that's unwitting. You take the UFO community, it's people repeating things from other people, repeating things from other people, repeating things. And when I came on the scene in 1990, 91, I thought, and you're going to see the whole doctor thing going here. There's something called a retrospective study, where you're always looking backward to see what has happened. Those are not very good studies. Mm-hmm. What you want to be doing are prospective studies, looking forward. So I said, why isn't anyone doing anything in real time and going forward to make contact and see what is really out there? Now, I had my CE5 experience when I was 18. I just turned 18 up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. And I didn't understand all the fine points of the science of consciousness, but I was meditating after a near-death experience I had and learned how to reach those states of consciousness, so-called samadhi and cosmic consciousness, and then the other states, unity consciousness, Brahman consciousness. And that happened between 17, 18, 19. So I began to practice that. And after I had contact with the ETs, I began to experiment with using the CE5 initiative protocols. And every time I did it, there were ET craft and beings that responded. So I realized it worked, but I didn't know what to do with it all those years. And I became a medical doctor, and by 1990, decided I really ought to do this. And some things happened. I was visited 3 different months in a row, January, February, and March of 1990, by ETs, one of in my bedroom. And they said, you should ought to be doing this now. And that, of course, that was 17 years after my initial experience. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm a emergency doctor. I have 4 kids. This is crazy. Put my whole reputation and career at risk. But I did it, and here we are. But I think that what I realized is that getting into this space really can cut off what the intelligence community is always planning through their psyops. They're called psychologicians. We have a document from the 40s and another one from the 50s. It talks about, quote, I'm quoting from the CIA document, the psychological warfare value of the UFO issue. Well, right. What are they talking about? Well, they realized that they could seed false information, disinformation into the public that are negative scenarios and false scenarios, and expand on that to do hoaxed events. Like the Air Force intelligence guy who says, yeah, we've been hoaxing abductions. Mm-hmm. Now, I found that out in 1993, 94 from people who came to me who were on the abduction squads that had done abductions all over the world using man-made things that look like UFOs. They call them ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, that are anti-gravs. And in the old days, there's a really funny story. They were using, like this one man that I met who had been on one of these squads was very, very tiny. Mm-hmm. So he was like 4 feet something. And then they had a really like a Hollywood level, Steven Spielberg level make costume and stuff. And he was on one of these man-made craft and would stage abductions of people. So that started the whole mutilation and abduction zeitgeist. That's 99% of ufology now. Well, right, the CIA, the intelligence community, both the CIA and military intelligence community tied into these unacknowledged special access projects were responsible for that. So I'm not saying that everyone who's had an experience with the ETs were a victim of that, but the ones that have had the invasive, painful, scary things happen are. And it's a little more complicated. The people who've had actual ET contact, they would know who those people were. And they would then piggyback afterwards and do a military abduction to them.
Right.
So that they would then be scared and stop doing what they were doing to make contact. And at this point, what I tell people is that there is such a mythology of fear built up around this through books, movies, conferences, the internet. There's some people say, oh, there's an intergalactic war with the one species of reptiles stealing babies with warships. I mean, you've seen this stuff. I don't talk about people. I'll just talk about ideas. And it's all absolute rubbish. It's scripted. It's right out of the script room of the CIA. Now, one of the reasons why I'm very confident this is true is I've been head of a team of people that for 30 years has done thousands and thousands of hours with thousands of people all over the world making contact.
Yeah.
We've never been harmed. We've never had anything invasive happen that we didn't want to do that was voluntary. The only time that we've been frightened is when a military asset has been inserted onto the site, which when the leader of the project is there, myself, they would tend to do. So one of the things, and I don't say this often, as we'll say it to you, this is more intimate audience, I guess, is that one of the reasons why I'm in a kill box. I'm as someone who initiated all this and I'm the original founder of the Disclosure Project. I'd have to be the most hated person in these USAPs. And so there's seamless, continuous monitoring. So if I'm doing something with a group of people, that's going to be monitored. But they don't have the assets, literally. If hundreds of thousands and millions of people start doing it, guess what? We can completely overwhelm their ability to suppress it, to hoax things, because people will be making direct contact. So one of the reasons why I went from disclosure, the CE5 initiative was the original movement. And once I merged onto the field in the early 90s, I mean, the intelligence community, because of a CE5 event that happened, approached me in 1992, and the head of Army intelligence and a bunch of people. And that led to the Disclosure Project, because I realized that we needed to get this information out to the public so that they were educated about two things, the false flag and the truth. But that's become increasingly difficult because the UFO subculture and other subcultures have continued to parrot the script of alien threat and the good ETs and the bad ETs. You know what's interesting about that? The good ETs always look like someone from Norway.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's very racist, and the bad ones look too different from us. And what the intelligence community has learned to do is to play on the tribalism and racism that is inside, whether we acknowledge it or not. Everyone has this tribal racist thing in us, the otherness that we're afraid of. So whether it's another race, another sexual orientation, another gender, another country, another religion, another economic system, demagogues have always known how to turn people against each other and create conflict.
Yeah.
We have to figure out, how do we go beyond that? But what they've done in the UFO subculture is to put out these narratives, but not just passive information, active events. I mean, they have actively done mutilations of animals and then made it look like the aliens did it. Same thing with abductions. And I frankly know many and many of the men who've been on those operations, who come to me and said, Dr. Greer, you have no idea how right you are. And they'll give me granular detail. Now, very few of them are willing to admit it publicly on camera. Obviously, that's Air Force Office of Special Investigations guy did. And there are others who come forward about, the media corruption and control, like Sheehan. But what you find is that for every person willing to go on camera, there are dozens like them I've met with who have been involved with these projects from the 50s all the way to the current day that are still hoaxing and staging things. Now, because they are very good at what's called stagecraft, the public believes that's all real. And because they believe it, they're afraid to go out and make contact. I got a tweet today that went, I wanted to do this. I did it once and an object came by, but then I got panicked because I didn't know if it was the good or the bad aliens.
Right.
Everyone, even the people doing CE5, have been brainwashed over and over again with this poison pill. And so it's like that song in Vogue, Free Your Mind. I don't know if you remember that Free Your Mind song. You got to free your mind of the nexus of disinformation that has been very expertly crafted to hit all of our hot buttons of us versus them, cowboys and Indians, black versus white. What they're really trying to do is set up this narrative of us versus them.
Yeah.
And so they'll say, oh, yes, well, there are extraterrestrials out there, but some of them are good and some of them are bad, and we'll connect with the good ones so we have an interplanetary war against the bad ones. That's the UFO and New Age shtick.
Yeah.
And they're just basically reading, they don't know it. They don't realize it. They're actually parroting and saying exactly what the intelligence community wants them to say. And I have a lot of sympathy for that because, in a sense, I emerged on the scene in 1990. By 1992, I'm meeting with the head of Army intelligence and CIA people. By 93, I'm briefing the sitting director of the CIA and the president. So I kind of started at the top. And then from that, built this vast network of sources and intelligence sources. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say lucky. I've been fortunate that I've actually been able to confirm a lot of this. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to put that information out because I'm afraid, going back to the Who song, we will be fooled again. And that we were fooled in the Vietnam War. We were fooled in 9/11. The coronavirus has become this thing that's an out of control in how it's being managed incompetently, leading to a societal shutdown.
Yeah.
The next thing that, if we're not careful, will be based on that CIA tweet from yesterday, April 1st, could very well be we're up to the challenge of the alien threat. The CIA, we're up to the challenge. Well, what challenge is that? The challenge is actually they're asking us to behave civilized. Be peaceful. Don't put weapons in space. Don't target us or other planets. But it's fallen on deaf ears. Eisenhower tried to do this in 1956. And the military-industrial complex, as he called it, circled the wagons and basically thwarted his efforts to create a peaceful dialogue with these civilizations, denuclearize the world, and become a peaceful interplanetary place. So Eisenhower actually wanted to do that. And because he did, the warmongers and the fascists, like Paul Mellon and others, circled their wagons and cut the president out. People don't realize this out of control, unacknowledged special access, that goes back to the mid-50s, where the president on down were decapitated in an unacknowledged coup d'etat. So now we're all sitting ducks from the most powerful government and military in the world to the average citizen. But the average citizen is only getting what the internet, movies, and shows say. So when TTSA came along, I immediately got a call from a friendly, let's call it, white hat at the CIA, who said, and I'm paraphrasing from the email that he sent first, and it said, this is the same group of people who have been scamming the US government and the public with disinformation for 30 or 40 years. All of them. Every single one of those people, except the boy that I was mentoring. What's his name? Tom DeLonge. He was the Blink 182 guy, and he stayed at my house here. And in the early days when I was, but then he got pulled in by masters of mind control, who then fed him all this scary information, where he's then going around talking about the alien threat, and it's a threat to our national security. So is Elizondo. So all these people in TTSA, they will put out one little shred of evidence, nowhere near as convincing as what we have in the Disclosure Project, by the way. It ends up on CNN, New York Times, everywhere, when normally that stuff is blacklisted. They don't talk about it. But it's always with, here's the evidence, and then they work in sub rosa, sort of, this narrative of being a threat. It's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our democracy. And it's a threat to our control of our airspace. So it's always spun that way. So people need to be awake to the fact, the millions of people who may get on your site need to be aware to the fact that that's the kind of, that's a preview of what they're planning to do. Except they can go from a few things like that to using a man-made anti-gravity device. It looks like a UFO, but it's made by Lockheed Skunk Works or Northrop Grumman, that then sends a laser weapon down and blows up a building. Yeah. So, see, the aliens did that. Well, guess what? A covert program did it, but it sure would look like a UFO. So actually, when I briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the 3-star general who is the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is like the CIA for the Pentagon, I'm sitting in his office, and this is what we're talking about. What I'm telling you right now is what I was talking to General Patrick Hughes about. And he had been denied access to these unacknowledged special access projects, even though he was at the top of the intelligence community for the entire Pentagon. And he knew he was a sitting duck. And he was scared because he knew that they could stage something and he would just be, neither he nor most of the commanders out in the field who are not cleared to unacknowledged level would be completely caught unaware. They would be fooled, completely fooled. Never mind the public, but I'm talking the most senior people at the Pentagon I have briefed. Yeah. The Intelligence Joint Staff, the CIA director, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, senior members of the Senate Intelligence Committee that I've met with. None of them have the information they need. And that's one of the reasons why, people go, what are you doing when you're not out public? I said, I'm trying to get people who are not bad people. They just don't understand what it is, how vulnerable they are to being caught flat-footed in another, let's call it a cosmic 9/11 scenario. Now, I'm hoping people who want to do CE5 can get educated about the false narrative, put it out of their minds, go out under the stars without fear. That's why the whole first part of this movie, by the way, is sort of trying to inoculate people from the virus of fear, the contagion of fear that is the stock and trade of ufology. So we have to transcend that. You can't go out under the stars and say, oh, I only want to meet with the ETs that look like they're beautiful blonde women from Sweden. All right. No, I mean, literally, I have people say that to me. Yeah. But the others I'm afraid of. I'm going, no. I say, you have just totally been drinking the Kool-Aid of the intelligence community, brainwashing you into this false duality, this us versus them duality. Yeah. So I feel that we have to be better than that. We have to be awake. If you want to go out and make contact, you need to understand that the very first thing that the ETs want is a clear intent, a pure heart, and for God's sakes, don't be an interplanetary racist. Yeah. If you're a racist, they don't want to deal with you.
Yeah. And that leads to an interesting question that relates to contact more, let's say on a mass level. If we were to say, hey, it's known around the world, as opposed to say millions of people that are just playing with CE5, but more so it's known around the world that we now have contact with extraterrestrials. When we look at this age-old story again of duality, of us versus them, of attacking each other and all this sorts of stuff, we can see that that's very much still existing in our world today. And people will often raise the question, we can have planetary contact when we first work out our differences amongst ourselves here as humans en masse, and then we'd be ready. What are your thoughts on that? Can we do it simultaneously?
Well, yes, I agree with you. That should have happened between the late 1800s and about 1920.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost 100 years.
Yeah.
Now we're facing a situation where we're running out of runway, and we're got to take off or we're going to crash. It's called, if you're a pilot, you know what V1 is, Victor 1. That's the point where you reach a certain distance on the runway and speed that you either have to rotate, take off, or shut the plane down because you're going to run out of runway.
Right.
That is a critical point. Our civilization as a whole is at V1, Victor 1, where we have to take off. We have frittered away 100 years where we should have had free energy, world peace, eliminated poverty, and evolved to a level 1 civilization. We lost that 100 years. I call it the lost century. There's a century that we've lost. And unacknowledged, I call this the lost century. But it doesn't mean we can't make up for that. Because what's beautiful about the power of mass consciousness and higher consciousness, getting back to this, what's called the Maharishi Effect, when 1% of people are meditating, it shifts the other 99% in a positive direction. So 1% of Canada, think about it, is only 200,000 or 300,000 people. That's eminently doable. Should be able to do that in the city of Toronto.
Yeah.
If you have 30 million people, right, 1% is 300,000. In America, it would be, 3 million. So there are 75 million people in America alone that are interested in meditation, yoga, new thought, peace, enlightenment. 75 million. So that's enough to transform the whole planet. So what I tell people is that this is eminently doable. But we've got to have the resources and the means to do this. And unfortunately, I'm doing this out of my house here in Virginia. And this film has been crowdfunded. It's terrible. Thank you all, everyone who's listening, for crowdfunding the film. Crowdfunding means people donated and supported it. And that site, ce5film.com, is still up. Because even though the film's finished, the cost for getting the word out in a world this big, we really need probably amount equal to the budget of the film in terms of getting the word out, because that's the normal thing that you have to do with a documentary. It's using an equal amount. We have nowhere near that. So we need people to continue to, if a fraction of your listeners went on that site and put in $1 or $10, we'd have it. But we need people to help support that because it's not being funded. The distributor of the film doesn't pay for any of the costs for getting the word out. That's 100% has to come from us, 100%, every dime. So we need kind of like internet networkers who are influencers and people getting the word out grassroots, and we need to continue to do that. And even networking through internet platforms can get pretty expensive, actually. There's the free part of it that all of you can volunteer to do, but the part that costs a lot of money, which I don't know how to do, but there's a team of people working on that for us, it can get costly. But the more we have, the more we're going to be able to get this word out globally into Russia and India and South America. So we get this 1% of the public aware of the fact that, number one, we're not alone. Number two, to avoid the false flag and to move us off the path of conflict, we need people coming together in meditation and peace and making direct contact. Because the technology of contact, even though we may use a light or a laser to let them know where we are specifically, is based in the science of consciousness, which is a big part of this movie. And that is, what is the science that shows that the mind and thought can interface with a machine? Well, that's like the random number generators that Dr. John at Princeton And when I talked to Dr. John before he passed away, when he was doing that work at Princeton, he says, what you're doing out under the stars is a clinical application of what we're doing in the laboratory at Princeton. And he really loved it. I mean, he really did. And so I said, yeah, we're doing this in real time, becoming ambassadors to the universe. And that's kind of what people how to view themselves. But you have to sort of say, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to rely on someone else to do it for me. So I'm going to learn this meditation. I'm going to learn how to do coherent thought sequencing. And guess what? These civilizations have something that would be smaller than this that has, seamless interface with consciousness field, and thought directed to it. Not a random thought, but a coherent, intended thought. So, of course, Elon Musk is working with he has formed a company called Neuralink so that he can set up the ability for thought to interface with a computer because he's learned about this stuff.
Yeah.
But these civilizations that are hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years ahead of us, they have this down to a perfect, seamless science. So think about that. Think about where we've come in 100 years. Now extrapolate out 100,000, a million, a billion years. So those civilizations only have innate telepathic capabilities, which we all have, but they have technologies that seamlessly interact with it, the conscious field. And that's what we're doing. So once you realize that, and a big part of this movie is focused on what science is there that establishes that your thoughts and mind can influence water or an electronic system or a random number generator. Well, that's presented in the movie. But then we take it one step further. Imagine civilizations that have systems that are designed to interface faster than the speed of light with a quanta of thought. It's like a photon. But what is thought? What is consciousness? It's real. And so these civilizations, all of them, have that technology. So we don't have to have that as long as we understand how to meditate and do some remote viewing and then connect with them and invite them. I hate the term call them down and summon them. It's like you summon a servant.
Yeah.
It's horrible language. Let's get the language right. We are inviting them to interact with us as co-equals and ambassadors from Earth to their people. That's how we should approach it. I really don't like people saying, well, I'm calling them down. Well, you're not calling them down. I'm summoning them. You don't summon them. I mean, like they're fetching for you like the butler in Downton Abbey, or something. So I think we have to take this in a serious way, in a respectful way to these civilizations. And we should be respectful to each other and respectful to them and not act like, and be, sort of facile and flippant about it. It should be taken with great seriousness. But when you take it in that vein, if you do it that way, they always respond. Every single time we've done it, they come.
Yep, absolutely. One of the last things I wanted to ask here, this relates to so much of what you just said, and it's kind of the exciting or inspiring part to some extent for people. When you talk about the technologies and our innate abilities and the innate abilities and technologies of extraterrestrials and so forth, all of this stuff sort of coalesces and comes together, and it allows us to picture for a moment what our world, what our daily life could look like as we move forward with this connection and this entering into this relationship with extraterrestrials over the course of time that will come with trades and sharing and so forth of technologies and ideas. In your heart, in your own vision, what do you see the world looking like as we continue to develop this relationship?
Well, it's unimaginably beautiful. I had a series of dreams. So I think part of the Cherokee in me, it's a Cherokee trait, and also Aboriginals in Australia, to have these lucid dreams of the future. And I have those a lot. And I started having a series of these visions, and it's sort of embarrassing to talk about this, but I met my wife in a lucid precognitive dream before I ever knew her on this plane of existence. And so most of the important things in my life I've first seen in the remote view and lucid dream state, and then it happens. So some of these were way into the future. Well, not that far, a few decades in the future, and then a few hundred years. And we had made it through this transition, this transformation from the civilization we are now to a coherent, peaceful, interplanetary civilization. And it was just beautiful because the Earth was this pristine environment, no pollution and no poverty, and very enlightened consciousness. Because what had happened, what I saw was we weren't struggling to eke out an existence, clubbing each other over the head for a piece of bread. There
Mm-hmm.
was such a level of coherence and abundance because of both our consciousness and our technologies that were being used only for good purposes. There was no more warfare, there was no more fighting. That within a generation, we had advanced to a world that had no poverty and no diseases, also no illness. The environment was pristine using these free energy systems, and there were no surface roads. We were just levitating, floating over in these amazing anti-grav or electromagnetogravitics. But the bigger vision that I saw of that was that the people were working maybe 10 or 20 hours a week, and the rest of the time they were pursuing creative endeavors and thought and meditation. And in a generation or two, there were people being born into such a state of enlightenment. So first it seems like, it's a piece of sort of like we're no longer just destroying the planet and fighting each other. But then on that foundation of universal peace on Earth and in space, people have the time and the focus and the coherence that they are spending a lot of their intention on the development of higher states of consciousness, going into cosmic consciousness, unity consciousness, celestial, even though they're on the earth. And that happens very quickly, extremely quickly. And so the world was this rose garden of beautiful people and environment where we collectively had evolved into this not only a level one civilization, but even higher ones, where, and looking way down the future, everyone eventually being born on the planet or born already in a state of cosmic consciousness, higher consciousness. And that's how societies evolve. And I did a seminar last year, I believe, or year before, about a level one all the way through level 10 civilization. Most of the civilizations we're dealing with who are here are at level 4 to 10. 10 would be civilizations that are it's such a rarefied level that everyone in the civilization are literally functioning at the celestial level of higher consciousness, even while they have bodies and societies on a planetary body. But that's a very exalted high level. But our civilization in a few decades becomes very, very organized, coherent, peaceful. All wars have stopped permanently. And I'm talking thousands, 500,000 years looking into the future, no conflict on this planet. And so with that, you have liberated the human spirit to pursue higher states of consciousness. And people are not just enslaved to a paycheck. Because think about it, there's such abundance. If you have technologies, which by the way we already have, that can pull out of the fabric of space-time any object you want. It's like the ancient masters who could materialize a ruby or even a town. If you look at Yogananda's book, that can be done. All those what are called siddhis, siddhis, powers that you can think of through consciousness can also be done through technologies. So when you become a planetary civilization that's also enlightened, your technologies are born out of your state of consciousness, your level of consciousness. So these interstellar civilizations we're dealing with now have all come this way before us, obviously, or they couldn't be here. They wouldn't be able to go interstellar, and they understand this. But we're at this point. We're the younger children of Earth, who it's now our turn to become a planetary, peaceful civilization where consciousness and technology evolve together. And it's like the Shambhala kingdom that existed at one point, which did exist, but it was a small geographical area in the Himalayas. We're talking now about the entirety of the globe being like that and beyond, and very high tech. That's what I've seen, and I know it'll happen. It's how are we going to get there?
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do to get there, but it'll happen. I'm very, very optimistic. People say, all this stuff you've dealt with and the murders and the people on my team who've been killed and I was almost killed. I said no, because my vision's on the far horizon.
Right. Same. I totally feel and connect with you on that as well. I'm extremely optimistic. What, for people to help, get engaged in this and to start creating this world, in their own empowerment and so forth that you just laid out beautifully there. Tell them how they can and when they can watch this film so they can start getting engaged in all this.
Well, it's going to come out on April 7th on platforms all over the world. And we hope the app is also live then. We're racing the clock here, but it may be delayed a little bit, but we'll get it out. And I think that if people see the movie and support that and then share it with everyone you know, it's actually so much better than unacknowledged or serious. And it's I think everyone who's seen it, a number of A-list celebrities in Hollywood, people have seen it, they just can't believe this movie. Mm-hmm. So I think when people see it, the director and I, Michael Mazzola and I, worked on it a long time, hard. The evidence and information in it was 45 years in the making, since I was 18. But I think that when people see it, they need to then take the next step and share it with other people. And when we get out of lockdown, host events for people to see it. And then form your CE5 teams. Form a team. Get the app. Learn to do the remote viewing, the meditations, how to do the coherent thought sequencing to connect and guide them in to where you are, and form your own operations. And then what I want to do, now that we've set up that network, we have about 100,000 people around the world doing this now, but we want to have around 70 to 80 million people.
Yeah.
I know it sounds ambitious, but I think we can do it. And to do that, we need everyone's help to sort of get the word out and to continue to help us at the crowdfunding site, ce5film.com. We're going to keep that live for quite a while so that we can continue to put in place the mechanisms and have enough funding to put the word out to larger and larger demographics of the population. My hope is that in the next 9 months to 12 months, we can reach a very large number of people who will then take the next step after they've learned what's in the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and then begin to practice meditation together and doing these things, which are just, everyone who goes out and does this, they just have these beautiful experiences. I mean, some people have healing experiences like you see in the movie. Some people just have amazing contact. It may continue in the lucid dream state. There's beautiful things that happen. And even if, you don't see anything with your naked eyes, know that when you're doing this and you're going into that conscious state, you're actually, you're the leaven. You're the what's lifting up the whole world. So yeah. By doing this together, we're all lifting up the world. And so the other thing everyone can do is meditate together in a state of meditation and for peace, and see this, I call it the good future that awaits us, that isn't that far away. And in fact, it's not based on time. It's based on what collectively humans do together. It could happen in the twinkling of an eye, actually.
Yeah, Absolutely. Very well said. And I want to thank you for making this film, for doing this work all these years, getting the word out there. This is such an important topic. Obviously, I truly do believe and connect very much with the idea that this is how humanity will move forward. Not just with the extraterrestrial contact, that's a piece of the puzzle, but with empowering ourselves like we've talked about here. So thank you so much for doing this work. Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Hands, you can do this.
Yeah, exactly. Our social distancing, thank you.
It works. All right. Thank you so much.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.